What if everything you believe about the internet is wrong? What if the websites you visit, the videos you stream, the messages you send, none of it is really happening where you think it is? How many searches did you run? How many videos did you watch? How many messages did you send without ever once wondering what made any of it possible? For most people, the internet is as invisible as gravity. It is simply there. You open an app, and it works. You load a page, and it appears. You send a file across the planet, and it arrives in seconds. Nobody thinks about why. But why does it work? Who built the system that carries your data from your screen to a server and back in milliseconds? Who maintains it? Who owns it? And who is profiting from it in ways that almost nobody discusses? Behind every single interaction you have online, behind every search result, every streamed episode, every video call, every online payment, there is a physical infrastructure of extraordinary scale. Cables, servers, cooling systems, power grids, switching stations, buildings the size of football pitches filled with machines running 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, drawing enough electricity to power entire cities. None of this appears on your screen. None of it is branded. None of it has a face or a name that ordinary users would recognize. It operates in the background of the background, silent and invisible, and yet without it, the internet as the world knows it would cease to exist within hours. And the companies behind it, they are not the ones you think. Which brings the mystery right back to where it began. If the names everyone recognizes are just customers, then who is actually running this thing? Think about what happens in the moment you type a web address and press enter. Most people imagine that process as something simple. You ask, the internet answers. But what actually happens in that fraction of a second is one of the most complex logistical operations in human history, repeated billions of times every single day. Your request leaves your device and travels to a router. From there it moves through a series of physical cables, some buried under streets, some running beneath oceans, until it reaches a data center. Inside that data center, your request is processed by servers, matched to stored information, and sent back to you along the same invisible path. The entire round trip can take less than 50 milliseconds. That is faster than a human blink. Now ask yourself, who owns those cables? Who built those data centers? Who manages the networks that carry this data across continents and under oceans? Who decided where all of this infrastructure would be located, who could access it, and at what price? These are not questions most people ever ask. And that silence, that complete absence of curiosity, is exactly what allows this industry to operate at an almost incomprehensible scale without public scrutiny. Here is a fact that should stop you cold. There are over 400 submarine cables currently running along the floors of the world's oceans. These cables carry approximately 97% of all international internet traffic. Every email crossing an ocean, every international video call, every international financial transaction, all of it depends on a network of cables lying in complete darkness, miles beneath the surface of the sea. Some of these cables are barely thicker than a garden hose, and almost no ordinary internet user has any idea they exist. But someone owns them. Someone laid them. Someone profits every time data moves through them. To understand who actually runs the internet, you need to understand the industry it depends on. Not the apps. Not the platforms. Not the social networks or the streaming services. The infrastructure underneath all of them. It begins with data centers. These are the physical buildings where the internet lives. When you upload a photo, store a document in the cloud, or watch a video on demand, that content sits on a physical server inside a physical building somewhere in the world. These buildings are enormous. They require extraordinary amounts of power to run the servers inside them and extraordinary amounts of water or refrigeration to cool those servers down. A single large data center can consume as much electricity as a small city. Who builds and operates these facilities? Primarily a group of companies known as colocation providers and hyperscale operators. These businesses do not create apps or platforms. They build, own, and rent the physical space that makes apps and platforms possible. Companies like Equinix, Digital Realty, and NTT operate hundreds of facilities across dozens of countries, renting server space to businesses of every size, from startups to the world's largest technology corporations. And then there are the networks connecting these facilities. Internet exchange points, known as IXPs, are physical locations where different networks meet and exchange data. They are the crossroads of the Internet. Without them, traffic between different service providers would be slow, unreliable, and extraordinarily expensive. There are hundreds of these exchange points around the world, and the companies that operate them charge for every connection made through them. Above all of this sits the backbone, the high-capacity fiber optic cables that carry massive volumes of data between cities, between countries, and between continents. Owning a segment of backbone infrastructure means owning a toll road that every data packet on the Internet must eventually use. And the companies that own these segments quietly generate billions in revenue every year from businesses that have no choice but to pay. Does any of this sound like something that should operate without public awareness? Without meaningful regulation? Without most people even knowing it exists? What is the true scale of what we are describing? Is it possible to put a number on an industry this vast and this invisible? Consider this. The global data center market alone was valued at over $220 billion in 2023. The submarine cable industry, which most people have never heard of, is valued in the tens of billions and growing faster than almost any other infrastructure sector in the world. The broader Internet infrastructure market, including networking equipment, fiber optic cables, exchange points, and cloud backbone services, represents hundreds of billions of dollars in annual economic activity. To put that in perspective, that is larger than the entire global film and music industry combined. It is larger than the airline industry. It is a financial system of staggering proportions, and it operates almost entirely outside the awareness of the people whose daily lives depend on it completely. Every time someone watches a single minute of streaming video, it generates a data load that must be physically transported, stored, and processed. Global Internet traffic currently exceeds 5 exabytes per day. 1 exabyte is 1 billion gigabytes. 5 billion gigabytes of data, moving through physical infrastructure, every single day. And who pays for all of that movement? Ultimately, every business that operates online passes these infrastructure costs along, embedded invisibly in subscription fees, service charges, and product prices. You are paying for this industry every day. You just have no idea you are doing it. Different regions have built radically different relationships with this infrastructure. The United States houses the majority of the world's largest data center clusters. Singapore has become the Internet gateway for the entire Southeast Asian region. Frankfurt hosts one of the most powerful Internet exchange points on Earth. These geographic concentrations are not accidents. They are the result of deliberate strategic investments by governments and corporations who understood, earlier than most, that controlling Internet infrastructure means controlling the economic future. Is it any coincidence that the nations with the most control over this infrastructure are also the most economically dominant nations in the digital age? Now return to the detail that opened this story, the one that still has not been fully explained. The companies that everyone associates with the Internet. The search engines, the social networks, the streaming platforms, the e-commerce giants, are customers of this invisible industry, not its owners. They depend on infrastructure they did not build, maintained by companies most of their users have never heard of. Why does that feel so strange? Why does it seem so counterintuitive that the most powerful and recognizable companies in the world are, in a fundamental sense, tenants? Because it completely inverts the mental model most people carry. When you think of the Internet, you think of Google, Netflix, Amazon, Meta. These are the brands. These are the faces. These companies spend billions on public presence, on advertising, on cultural visibility. And yet every single one of them rents space inside buildings owned by someone else, pays tolls on networks they do not control, and depends on submarine cables laid by consortiums operating in near total obscurity. Who negotiates those cable landing rights with foreign governments? Who decides which cities get connected and which get bypassed? Who controls the choke points where entire national Internet systems converge? These are not questions that trend on social media. These are not debates happening in public forums. And yet the answers determine which countries develop fastest economically, which businesses can compete globally, and which communities remain digitally isolated. The invisible industry does not just run the internet. In a very real sense, it decides who gets to use it, and on whose terms. How is it possible that something with this much power operates with this little accountability? Here is the answer. The invisible industry running the internet is the data infrastructure industry. The companies that build, own, and operate the physical systems that carry every piece of digital information on Earth. And it operates invisibly not by accident, but by design. These companies do not need consumer recognition. They do not sell to individuals. They sell to corporations, to governments, to institutions, at prices and under contracts that are rarely disclosed publicly. Their power does not come from brand loyalty or public affection. It comes from physical control of irreplaceable infrastructure. When a company needs to expand into a new market, it cannot simply launch an app and hope for the best. It needs connectivity. It needs data center space. It needs access to networks with sufficient capacity to serve millions of users. And the companies that control that access know exactly what it is worth. This is why the infrastructure industry has quietly consolidated into the hands of a small number of extraordinarily powerful players. It is why certain companies have spent decades and tens of billions of dollars laying cables under oceans and building facilities in strategic locations around the globe. Not because they wanted to build a better internet for everyone, because they understood that controlling the physical foundation of the digital world is the most durable competitive advantage in modern economic history. The internet feels free, open, borderless, and weightless. That feeling was always the product of infrastructure someone else paid to build, owns the rights to, and profits from every single moment you are online. The next time you open your phone, ask yourself a question you have probably never asked before. Where is this actually happening? Not metaphorically, physically. Where are the servers holding your data? Where are the cables carrying your information? Who owns the building your cloud storage lives in? Who laid the fiber that connects your city to the rest of the world? Who profits every time you stream, search, message, or transact? You cannot see any of it. You were never meant to. The invisible industry that runs the internet was built to be frictionless, to feel like magic, to disappear completely into the background of daily life. And it succeeded. But invisible does not mean small. Invisible does not mean powerless. Invisible does not mean unaccountable. It means hidden. And the things hidden deepest are usually the things that matter most. Every click you make today will pass through infrastructure owned by companies you have never heard of, traveling through cables you did not know existed, powering an industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars that operates in the complete absence of public scrutiny. The internet does not belong to the platforms. It belongs to the pipes. And the question nobody is asking is, who gave them permission to own everything underneath?